ready to talk about Jesus then? Everybody was knocking on the door at 7:45, and Mike thought they were all coming to hear him. But they were coming to hear about Jesus. Mike, I'm sure if you start talking about Jesus, they'd tune in. But so we'll continue in the Life of Christ study, which I think we began 4 or 5 weeks ago. It's amazing how quickly time goes by as we get into these studies. And you know what's really cool? I'll be honest. In my past in church, whenever I would do a unit, hey Darcy, can you mute up there? Just make yours work. Whenever I would do a unit, or I know when a pastor would try to do a unit, they always had to keep it to about 6 weeks, because after 6 weeks, people, they fall off. There's no staying power. But what I appreciate about you guys is you're going to show up and you're going to want it, and we can talk about this Life of Christ for as long as it takes, and I'm pretty confident in the fact that you're going to continue to show. And I appreciate that. I think that's encouraging. So I'll give a quick review about what we've covered to this point, and then give some new material. So far, we looked the history lesson on the Roman Empire, because when Jesus entered into this world, he entered into what was known as the Roman Empire. We know that the Jewish people, the Israelites, were waiting on someone to come and to rescue them, someone that was going to set them free from the emperor and his rule. And so in their scriptures, they read of a coming Messiah. And so they had these high expectations, right? This Messiah that was going to come and deliver them from the tyranny that they were under. Then we started to look at John the Baptist, who we showed he was known as the forerunner to Jesus Christ. He paved the way. Scripture shows us that. We talked about him for a bit. And then we began to look at some of the Old Testament prophecies about this Messiah that was going to come. And so, setting up for our Christmas study, which we did last week, we looked at 3 Old Testament prophecies. One indicated that this Messiah was going to be born in Bethlehem. Another prophecy in the Old Testament indicated that this Messiah was going to be called out of Egypt. And then another prophecy indicated that this Messiah would be called a Nazarene, right? And so we said, how is this going to happen? How is this Messiah going to be born in Bethlehem? How's he going to come out of Egypt? How's he going to be called a Nazarene? And so we kind of began through that quest last week, and we got this far. We got to the fact that Quirinius, a pagan ruler, issued a decree that people should return to their hometowns for a census that was going to be taken. And that prompted Mary and Joseph to return to Joseph's hometown, which was Bethlehem. And at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, because my memory might slip me, but they were in Nazareth when this census was issued. And so now they had to leave, and they had to travel to Bethlehem, which was about 90 miles, so that the census could be taken. And while they were there, Jesus, the Messiah, that the Jews had been waiting for, that many didn't realize, he was born in Bethlehem, and thus fulfilled that prophecy that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. And then we moved on after Jesus was born. Angels appeared in the sky to the shepherds, and this is where we left off. And they proclaimed, "Unto you is born today a king," And we left off saying, what happened? What did the shepherds do? They heard and they responded appropriately. They believed it, and they went to see this child who had been born, and they spread the word about what they had heard. And we talked about, we should have the same type of attitude knowing the Messiah, that we should respond in obedience and spread the word about him. And so we're going to pick up there. And I'm going to do a little different this week. Rather than share my screen constantly, I won't do that for all of the scriptures. I will just read them. Mike blessed me with 2 screens, so I can look at you guys and look over at this screen. I'm high tech now, so thanks, Mike. But you guys can feel free. Maybe you'd want to go ahead and turn to Matthew 2, because we're going to spend a little bit of time there. And I'm going to read the first 12 verses of Matthew 2, and then talk a little bit about them and how they pertain to the life of Christ. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly, and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Okay, now, let's go back to what we've learned about the history of the time. Herod was the king, appointed king of all of Palestine. And I will bring up the map real quick. Let's refamiliarize ourselves with the map of the area. Let me share this. And let's see here. Screen 2, share. Let's go over here and is it coming up? Click on the big map. I'm clicking on the big map. And it appears to be loading. All right. Well, that's as big as it gets. Are you guys able to see it somewhat? So let's just kind of remember here. So Mary and Joseph up here in Nazareth, they're taking a census. They go down south, straight south, down to Bethlehem where Jesus is born. And now the Magi come from the east, which northeast, they come from over here. They come and they're traveling. And they are going to meet King Herod, who is appointed king over this entire region. This entire region called Palestine is what King Herod is ruling over. Okay? I'll stop sharing and just talk with you. So, remember this. King Herod was appointed ruler over the Jews in their area. However, he wasn't really a Jew. I mean, we talked in the first week that his parents had apparently been converted Jews, and so he kind of grew up as a Jew, but not really. So he had been appointed by the Roman Senate. And King Herod, if you guys aren't too familiar, but maybe you are, he wasn't so great. Herod the Great really was not great, and he was hated by the Jewish people. Now, he was great in the sense that he did do some pretty good things as far as for the economy. When I read up a little bit about King Herod, he did build some theaters, he built an amphitheater, he bought monuments, and he even began erecting the temple. So he was doing some things for the area, you know. However, he was wacko. He was incredibly insecure. He was crazy, like mentally ill kind of crazy. He was so jealous. His jealousy, I was amazed by this, led him to kill anyone that he suspected that might rival his power. And what surprised me was who he had killed his wife, he had killed 3 of his sons, he killed his mother-in-law, his brother-in-law, his uncle, and others, all because he feared that they might be able to rise up and take over his power. He was extremely jealous. Now, also, I want to read to you a little bit out of this commentary just to paint the picture a little more for you, this says something of Herod's savage, bitter, warped nature. Listen to this. I better put glasses on. As much as I'm trying not to do this, I gotta do it. All right. Something of Herod's savage, bitter, warped nature can be seen from the provisions he made when death came near. When he was 70, he knew that he must die. He retired to Jericho, the loveliest of all the cities, and he gave orders that a collection of the most distinguished citizens of Jerusalem should be arrested on trumped-up charges and imprisoned. And he ordered that the moment that he died, they should all be killed. He said grimly that he was well aware that no one would mourn for his death, and that he was determined that some tears would be shed when he died. Wow. He knew nobody liked him and he was crazy, and that when he died, they were probably going to have a party. And so he imprisoned people and said, when I die, you kill them, so that there will be mourning in the land. So you just kind of get a picture of what this guy that the Magi are showing up to see was like. So these Magi, what are they? We know the wise men, right? And here in Scripture we see them called Magi. And why did they come to Jerusalem? Well, when I began to, there's so many different ideas of what Magi are. Good luck. Do your own research. But we see Scripture refer to them as wise men, but what's that? Does that just mean a guy that's smart? Or, one thing that the majority of what I found seemed to agree with was that these wise men, these Magi, were experts in the study of stars. Okay? And apparently they had been watching for one particular star, which they knew was going to symbolize the Messiah's birth. Because they knew about this coming Messiah. And they had apparently looked at scriptures, and they had been waiting for this star. And they knew that it was imminent. And so they began this pilgrimage to go and find the Messiah so that they could worship him. And this star, they called it, the wise men, they called it his star. All right? You can, if you want to have some good reading, and I'll just save the time, you do it on your own. Look up the Star of Bethlehem on Got Questions. Got Questions. It's a really good site. And some interesting stuff about this star that they were following. So the wise men, they were following this. This star was coming, and they didn't. So my understanding is this: they went to Jerusalem because that was the Jewish capital to begin their quest there. All right. So they knew that the star was imminent, so they headed to Jerusalem in search of this king and the star to follow. So while they're there, they go to King Herod. And they meet with him. And so Herod gathers the scribes and the priests, and he asks about this Christ. He says, when or where is this Christ to be born? Isn't it interesting that he didn't know? He didn't know the scriptures. He's the king of the Jews, right? And he didn't know where this Messiah was going to be born at. He didn't know. He had to ask. So we saw in verse 3 there that when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. So why was Herod disturbed when these wise men came who were searching for this Messiah? Well, the priests, look at verse 6. The priest told him this. He said, here's where he's going to be born. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people. So, let me set this up. The wise men ask about the Messiah. Herod asks the scribes and the priests, where is he going to be born? They quote Micah 5:2 right there and indicate that it's Bethlehem. So Herod tells the Magi to go there. He tells them in secret. He didn't tell them in front of everybody. He says, I want you guys to go and find the child. Now, why did he tell them in secret? Because he didn't want the priests to know, because why? He's jealous. He wants to kill this king. Right? So he tells them secretly, go and find him, so that I might worship him too. Right? So the Magi leave, and in verse 9, it says, after listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. So the Magi go, and the star of Bethlehem, it's so neat to read about the star. You guys got to read about the stars. They talk about it being the Shekinah glory of God and all different ideas of what the star was. But the star stopped right over where Jesus was. So they go in, the wise men, and they present 3 gifts to him. And we know those are gold, but maybe you're not sure what those symbolize. Some of you might, but gold is symbolic of a gift that is for a king. Okay? They gave him the gift of a king. There was frankincense, which is a gift for a priest, and we know Christ as what? Prophet, priest, and king, right? And I can't help but tell you guys, when I was young, my dad preached a sermon. He preached at a church, and he talked about the gifts, and he said, right in the sermon, he said, gold, Frankenstein, and myrrh. And so I cannot ever help but think of that every time I look at this. So it was frankincense, this gift that they gave, indicating a priest, and myrrh, which represents suffering, which was used to embalm the dead. Okay, so we know the prophetic indication of those gifts. So look at verse 12. After they gave the gifts, the Magi then, this is who it's referring to, being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. So the Magi were warned not to go back to King Herod. Warned in a dream. Now, a couple quick things, how the story has got messed up, the Christmas story. You know, we indicated this a little bit last week, but the Bible never tells us how many Magi there were, simply that there were 3 gifts. Okay? And where's the story generally? When the wise men arrive, where do they always go? They go to the stable, in the barn, or some people have heard even the cave. But where does this say that they found them in? Verse 11, where were they? And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshiped. So the thing with that is, by the time they had arrived, it's believed that Jesus had been born. He was at least a couple months old. Okay, so they didn't arrive like that very night out in the barn. Like by now, they had set up a house, or they were still staying in the area for a couple. There's all kinds of different ideas, but they went into a house. Okay, let's continue in Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 to 15. Now, when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, and said, rise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose up and took the child and his mother by night, and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. Wow, I like this stuff. Maybe you guys were fortunate, but growing up, I heard the Christmas story, I heard the stuff. I didn't ever know about all these different prophecies and how they were fulfilled, that this king was going to come out of Bethlehem, he's going to be called out of Egypt. And now we see God's hand in all this, fulfilling his promises. Out of Egypt, I've called my son. And we see now why he's going to Egypt, right? To avoid coming back to King Herod, who's waiting to kill him. So right now, Herod is waiting for the Magi to return and to report to him about the Messiah. But Matthew 2:16. Then Herod realized he'd been tricked by the wise men, and they didn't come back. And he became furious. And he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Okay, so Herod is upset. He realizes these guys aren't coming back. He's jealous. He is raging. He orders that all 2-year-old and under babies in Bethlehem be killed, and he used the idea of how long they had been gone and what they had told him prior to their leaving to kind of mathematically figure out how old this Messiah, this king that was born, would be. He figures, hey, 2 years and under, let's wipe all them out. That'll cover him. This one that's threatening my rule will be killed in the midst of this. Now, something that's kind of interesting is this massacre of these infants, toddlers, babies, is not, from at least the last time I studied this, this isn't recorded in history. And you would think that this might be recorded in history, like the massacre at Bethlehem, you know. But from what I came to understand, is first of all, this was nothing for him to do something like this. But maybe more recognizable is that Bethlehem was very, very, very small. And so we're talking, they believe, about maybe 12 infants. Okay? Not that everyone wasn't important, but this wasn't a wipeout of an entire city of 2-year-olds, and which may be why it wasn't historically recorded. Okay, but let's look at verses 17 and 18. Then was fulfilled what happened there. This was prophesied. What was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah had said, a voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. Okay, so Matthew, writing to the Jewish mind, is saying, hey guys, this wipeout of these babies was prophesied right here by Jeremiah. And to us, I don't see the word Bethlehem in there anywhere. There was a voice heard in Ramah. So I kind of did a quick look at that. And again, I hope I can even read what I wrote here. There's a lot to this story. Well, I just wrote down this. Rachel was traveling to Bethlehem from Ramah, which was south, south of Bethlehem, and she died 5 miles short of getting there. So somehow all this Rachel, Ramah, going to Bethlehem stuff, she must have got about 5 miles shorter of Bethlehem and died, but this is how Matthew says, hey, this was fulfilled. Okay, so let's go with Matthew and what he says about the fulfillment of that. So let's go to verse 19. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. You think Joseph was starting to look forward to these dreams? Man, I would love an angel of the Lord to just show up and tell me what to do. How about you guys? I could use a lot of wisdom, especially in these times we're living in, and it seems like Joseph just had an angel of the Lord to show up and tell him what to do and where to go. So he was probably looking forward to this. But this angel shows up in a dream and says, rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. For those who sought the child's life are dead. And he rose and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. And guess where he went? Guess! Verse 23. And he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. And we see this third prophecy fulfilled of the birth and the childhood of this Messiah, that he would be called out of Egypt, that he'd be born in Bethlehem, that he'd be called a Nazarene. Wow, how about that? A lot more than just the Christmas story. Let me put the map back up one more time before we move on, so that we can just have a clear picture of this in our mind. Share that. my sharing? I'm going to put the map up now. There we go. Okay, are we seeing the map? Okay. So he was born in Bethlehem. And then for time's sake, I'm not going to put up the other map, but if you go south and west, down around here, about, 350 miles is Egypt. And then he was warned in a dream, hey, return, but don't go back to here. Head up to Nazareth. All right? So this is where we're at now, and this is where Jesus is going to begin to grow up in Nazareth. Okay? Stop sharing. A lot more than just a Christmas story there. You have more to talk about next Christmas when you read Luke 2. Okay? Now, the childhood of Jesus. We know very, very little from his birth to age 12. We get all those details about his birth and what happened there that we looked at today, but we don't get much more until he's 12 years old. So Luke 2:40 is, I'll read to you here. Why don't you go ahead if you want to turn to Luke 2, because we're going to cover a little bit more in Luke 2 as well. I'll probably wrap up here in about 6 to 10 minutes, maybe. We'll see. Luke 2:40. And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. Okay? That's it. That's what you get to know between ages 2 and 12. He grew and became strong. He grew normally, but the presence of God was with him. Now let's continue to verses 42 to 50. Let's see what we know about Jesus as an adolescent. When he starts 12 years old and up. And when he was 12, verse 42 of Luke 2. When he was 12, they went up according to custom. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey, but then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem, searching for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" And they did not understand what the saying that he spoke to them. Now let's stop there for a second. First of all, how do you lose your kid? Right? What kind of parents are they? I mean, this long journey. And I remember that question entered my mind. So in those days, they traveled in large groups of people. So there was quite a few of them in this traveling band, and they all just kind of mingled among each other. You took care of my kids, and I took care of yours, and so it wasn't like they were walking side by side with him. They were going as a group. And so apparently they weren't the worst parents in the world. But verses 46 and 47 struck me. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And look at the response to this 12-year-old. Everyone who was listening to him was amazed at his answers. I wonder why, huh? Yeah, because he's the Son of God, maybe. Let's look at verses 51 and 52, and then we'll wrap up. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. This is Jesus. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. So Jesus took this all in. Mary took this all in. Imagine being her. We talked briefly about her last week. I preached a sermon about this. She's pondering everything in her heart. And then the last verse that we read about Jesus until he's 50 years old is right there, verse 52. Until he's 30 years old is verse 52. He increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. So you know what that does tell us? He didn't go off and become a monk or a hermit. All right? He didn't just go off into hiding, and that's why we don't know anything about him during this time. He grew in favor not only with God, but with men. So he apparently was learning to live like men. We know that he learned the trade of a carpenter. He was growing as a man with men and growing in favor with God and men. Because what I hope to get to tonight, but we'll just pick up and start here next week, because we know this, but we're going to be reminded again. Jesus Christ is fully God and fully man. Or you could put it truly God and truly man, however you prefer. But in order to show he grew as a man here. He showed his faithfulness as a man. He fulfilled the tasks that were given to him in the present, in this time. And it said there he even was submissive to his parents. He truly was a human. Yet he truly is fully God. And we'll just start there next week just to remind us and anyone who might listen. We'll talk briefly about the Incarnation before we then pick up and start to go forward with him as a man.